So in our synagogue, every Shabbos morning, the Torah service begins with this. Torah tziva lanu Moshe Morasha kehilat Yaakov. Torah tziva lanu Moshe Morasha kehilat Yaakov. Tziva lanu Moshe, tziva lanu Moshe Morasha kehilat Yaakov. Tziva lanu Moshe, tziva lanu Moshe Morasha kehilat Yaakov. Yai-la-lai, yai-la-lai, la-la-lai, yai-la-lai, la-lai-lai. Go, Amy! Yai-la-lai, la-lai, yai-la-lai, yai, yai-la-lai, la-la-lai, yai-la-lai, la-lai-lai, yai-la-lai, la-lai, yai-la-lai-lai. By the light, by the Torah's eternal light, lie-la-lie, lie-la-lie, lie-la-lie. Everybody get your cymbals out. Lie-la-lie, yai-la-lie, 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 lie-la-lie, di-di-di-di-di. With apologies to Paul Simon, welcome everyone. This evening I am particularly grateful to all of the tellers who are giving of their passion, giving of their time, giving of their hearts to this sacred gathering. Reb Zalman, of blessed memory, I believe he was quoting Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, Zichrono Livracha, when he said that a good maise, a good story, is a story where the mind surprises the heart. You grok that? Where the mind, because this is where we live most of the time, we're listening to the words, go, oh, so sweet, yes. I have to say that each of our tellers this evening is unto her or himself a living Torah. They're all friends and colleagues of mine. And I'm grateful again that you've given your time and your love to the oral tradition and love it as much as I do and as much as Renee does. Our tellers this evening are Cantor Linda Hirschhorn, joining us from Berkeley. Has Steve Klaper appeared? Well, we don't know where Steve is. He's probably in the netherworld somewhere. Anyone who's ever visited Steve in his Zoomagog. But he's often
traveling. I sent him a text.
What? Okay, thank you.
I sent him a text and have not heard a response.
Okay, well, I hope he's okay. Thank you, Rabbi Dan Gordon, affectionately known as Dante. He's the one who just texted Steve. Also, our very own Rabbinic Pastor Shulanmit Fagan. And my beloved storyteller, my favorite storyteller in the world, I have to say that. It's Renée Brachfeld. And I'm going to be weaving music and story and teaching and, of course, an attempt at humor throughout. Some of our tellers may need to leave a little bit early because they have their own shuls that they might have to get to be part of their own Shavuot gathering. But I hope that you'll all stay with us until the end. Our first teller this evening is Cantor Linda Hirschhorn, looking a lot younger in that photograph. Linda, how old are you there? Okay, we got to unmute you. There you go.
Oh, something like that.
How old are you there?
Well, it seems to range from about age 4
Yeah.
to 72 maybe, or 70, something like that. Yeah.
I think you might even be a little younger than 4. There in the left-hand corner, you're wearing a
Oh, yeah,
graduation
yeah.
gown, and then right next to that one.
Yeah, that might be a 2-year-old, but you're,
So
that's
if you
not,
want,
yeah, that's
if you
cool.
want to know anything about our storytellers this evening, you can go ahead and Google them for their bios.
There
But
you
that
go.
said, I wanted to share a little bit of something that you might not know about them and my relationship to them. I think, Linda, you and me really, really bonded at a Kala many years ago when at dinner following Kabbalat Shabbat, you and I traveled from table to table as each table was saying Kiddush for themselves. As we traveled from each table to table, we stuck around until the end so that we can offer an Amen. As we traveled from table to table, we picked up what eventually we called the Amen chorus. And
I
so,
think we have plans to revive that. If any of you needs people to say, we actually we're available to travel to your community to say amen to any of your brachot that need an amen. So
thank
just,
you,
Reb Mark,
Linda.
did we call that the Amen course or the Amenus?
Oh, we were the Amenus. Yeah, that formed the Amen chorus. Very good, Renee. We were the
wow.
Amenus. Yeah, we were long before any of these other groups. In any case, without further ado, please welcome Cantor Linda Hirschhorn.
I, Leabat Bracha, did not want to be standing at Sinai. But contrary to what you might have heard or read, all of us women were there. We just weren't part of the official count. Eliezer and I had a huge argument about it the night before. I don't have time to go stand around that mountain. You go. Tell me what happens. Wife, Eliezer says to me, you saw the notices. It's true. I saw them pinned to the flaps of all the tents. I saw them down by the firehouses, over at the washing circles. Everybody had to attend, the young, the old, the men, the women, the newborn, the dying. Well, we lived furthermost away from the center of where everything was going to be happening. We lived with the poorer families, and I knew that I'd have a lot of packing up and organizing to get us ready for the long day's trek ahead. Eliezer says to wake him when I'm ready. And sure enough, he gets up the next morning bright and chipper, and he hustles me and the kids out the flaps of the tent and into the crowds. The crowds, the noise, the smell, the pushing, and everywhere the dust. And all along the way, we saw that members of Reuben's tribe had set up gambling booths, and they were collecting bets on exactly what moment Moses could be seen coming down from the mountain. Eliezer, of course, wanted to place a bet, but that one pair of gold earrings that I had from my mother, Alea V'Shalom, may she rest in peace, he'd already donated on my behalf to that monstrosity. The golden calf ruined the whole desert vista. And when Aaron and his henchmen came and took it down, they carted off all the spoils, and what did we get from it? Bupkis, nothing. Maybe a tax rebate. I pulled Eliezer away from those booths and back into the crowds, and we kept on walking and walking until we came to a sudden standstill, jammed up against the people in front of us, hemmed in from the people coming in from behind. And as we stood there momentarily, this cascade of silence seemed to ripple through all of us. Nary a leaf was rustling, a bird twittering. It wasn't unpleasant. It seemed to cleanse us of all the toxic noise of our daily lives that just polluted our lives. And in its wake, melodies began rolling off the mountain. Hundreds and hundreds of melodies just pouring out, beautiful melodies. And we all began to sing that most beloved of melodies. Hiya, 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 hiya. You know this one, you can sing along. Hiya, 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 hiya. Hiya, hiya. Except With that lag time from the front to the back, pretty soon we were all singing in different tempos and in different keys. And you know, in some communities, they still pray that way. It makes them feel like they're davening again at Sinai. In other communities, they sing in unison. I have no opinion, to each his own. But there was a restlessness growing amongst us that I could feel. And then somebody started this chant, Moses, Moses, when are we going to see Moses? Moses, until a man nearby said, don't you know that Moses is simply an apparition of our collective imagination? And it said, if you look through and beyond the light, all the way past into the future to Gan Eden, you will experience Gan Eden where we all are shattered as one and unshattered and unbroken. Well, everybody began craning their necks, trying to look through and beyond the light where Moses was standing. But we couldn't see. But don't worry, the man continued. Even if you yourself don't have this vision, if those who do can communicate the transformative power of this experience, it will be as if we all had this vision. Well, with that, the men around me began throwing themselves on the ground, praying that they would be opening to listening and receiving. When I saw that Eliezer was about to throw himself on the ground, I said, what, are you crazy? You're going to get yourself trampled to death. And I pulled him up to me. And that's when we saw it, or heard it. The mountain was a thundering fire. And from off the mountain, a voice came resounding. Was it the voice of Moses? Was it the voice of God? Or was it the voice of our collective imagination? And the voice said, here are the words you need to survive forever and ever. Well, we all heard it. And you know, in the way when people hear something from somebody and then they start to repeat it to the next person, and maybe they changed a little word here and they changed a little word there, and I could see that for centuries to come, people would be debating exactly what was said and what did it all mean. For me, it came down to so much common sense. Don't murder. Don't steal. Don't go after someone else's wife. Respect your parents. I've been saying stuff like that for years. We wouldn't have survived until now if we hadn't lived by those principles. Afterwards, Eliezer sat in his corner of the tent, rocking back and forth, saying he felt enlightened, at one with the cosmos. Me, I don't have time for the cosmos. I have to get dinner ready for the kids, and I have to mend Eliezer's coat that got torn in the fray.
Thank you, Linda. There's always work to be done. Ki mitzion teitzei Torah udvar Adonai miYerushalayim. Ki mitzion teitzei Torah udvar Havaya miYerushalayim. Ki mitzion teitzei Torah udvar Hashem miYerushalayim. Ki mitzion teitzei Torah udvar Hashem. Put your hands together now. Here we go. Hi, 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 la 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 la. Hi, la la, hi, la 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 la. Hi, 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 la 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 la. Hi, hi, la, di 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 di. Ki mitzion teitzei Torah var Hashem miYerushalayim. I like that. Ki mitzion teitzei Torah udvar Adonai miYerushalayim. Yum pa dum bum. Well, there has been a Hazzan Steve Klaper sighting, and I know you're here somewhere in the room. There you are, Steve. Well, just hold on a moment. You're going to be our next teller, but I promised everybody to reinforce the truth, as you pointed out, Linda, that we have been trying to figure out what we received all the millennia ago. and commentators upon commentators. It's one thing to hear the language, but it's another thing to figure out what are we supposed to do? How are we supposed to live our lives? Naseh v'nishma, just go do, and then we'll understand. Easy for you to say. Well, of course, this brings to mind a controversy that many of you probably are very, very aware of. Well, first of all, in the Torah, we all know it says, do not cook a young goat in its mother's milk. Straight ahead, right? We understand what that means, right? No, we don't have any idea what that means because the commentators have been struggling about this for centuries. Well, maybe it means, well, you know where I'm going with this. God commands you shall not boil a kid in its mother's milk. And God says, you shall not boil a kid in its mother's milk. Oh, sorry, I went into that God voice. I shouldn't do that. And Moses responds, okay, so we have to have two sets of dishes. God says, you shall not boil a kid in its mother's milk. And Moshe replies, so, I get it now. We have to wait 6 hours between eating meat and milk. We're not supposed to eat them together. No. And God says, you shall not boil a kid in its mother's milk. And Moshe says, looking into the future, I can see the day when dishwashers are invented. You don't mix meat and milk, so if you really want to show off your kashrut creds, you run an empty cycle between the two. To which God says, Moshe, whatever you say, have it your way. Well, I know for a fact that Hazzan Steve Klaper has been trying to figure out what that means for a long, long time. I have experienced the wonder of Hazzan Steve, most especially at Kala and at Ohala. Ohala is the convention of rabbinical convention for unconventional rabbis, where we used to have a cabaret, right, Steve? And I remember one time you told a series of wonderful Hasidic tales accompanied by music. So I have no idea if you brought any music along, but ladies and gentlemen,
well, I usually bring music around.
Yay! Welcome, Hazzan Steve Klaper.
The name...
Hazzan Steve, before you get going, I just want to check and make sure you have original sound on so we can hear you.
I do have original sound on.
Thank you.
Actually, the name Klaper comes from the village Klopper, right? Who used to go around and clop on the shutters to bring people to, right? This is my Klopper. What can I tell you? I got a couple of stories I want to tell you. They are, I tend to turn stories into songs because I can, because I think it's many pathways at once. You get story, you get song, you get teaching, you get... Late one evening, when Reb Nachman and his Hasidim were gathered together, a strong wind blew in through the open window and extinguished all the candles. One of the Hasidim got up to close the window, but Reb Nachman said, no, let's sit for a while here in the dark. After a while, one of the Hasidim said, Rebbe, was the blowing out of the candle a good omen or a bad omen? Neither good nor bad, said Reb Nachman. It is a sign, however, that there is a presence that sits with us, an angel that waits with us here in the dark. This is the angel Yodea, the angel of losses. Even now he's watching our lives unfold, recording every detail before it fades. This angel, he has servants, and the servants, they have servants. Some of these servants are angels, and some of them, Kinderlach, some of them are people just like you and me. Each of these angels carries a shovel, and they spend all their time digging, searching for losses. For a great deal has been lost in our lives. So too every seeker is a servant of the angel Yodea. Because those who seek for lost things, sometimes they themselves are a bit lost. Sometimes those who seek to repair broken things, sometimes never, they're a little broken themselves. And you know, Kindala, when you search, sometimes it's necessary to search in the dark. Reb Nachman stood up at the table. He said, "So, Kindala, with what do we search with in the dark? With the light of the soul. Neya Nishmat Adam, the candle of God, the lamp of God, is the soul of mankind. You don't need a torch. You don't need a bright beam in the deepest well. In the darkest cave, one lone candle will illuminate every corner and crevice. We're called upon to tend this candle, this Ner Tamid, daily, regularly, continually, forever. We're called upon to go on searching. In this way we find what we thought was lost. We heal what we thought was broken." And the Hasidim looked at Reb Nachman as he stood there at the table, his arms outstretched, his face glowing, illuminated, radiating light, piercing the clouds of darkness, swirling all around them. Hi, L'chaim.
L'chaim, thank you, Steve.
I got another one.
I got a million of them.
I got a million of them, one for every day of the week.
Steve, just you might want to pull back. You're overdriving just a tad.
I will turn it down. Thank you. I got to go to audio. I got to turn it down. All right, maybe that's better.
Just want everybody to know that we really appreciate when you have your video on, because we're telling you these stories, we're sharing this with you. If you don't have your video on, we understand many reasons why not, but if there's any way that you could put your video on, so, wonderful. Thank you so much. We would love if you do that. Back to you, Steve.
The story about boiling the kid in its mother's milk. You know, I grew up Orthodox, so I had all this, all this stuff swirling into my head from the time I was, I don't even know what. But what was better was were the stories. Were the stories that my Zeta told me, that my great grandmother, she tried telling me stories, but she and I didn't speak the same language, so my father would have to translate. Anyway, I studied in Brooklyn, Magidut with Yitzchak Buxbaum, Oliver Shalom, and that's how I found my way to Aleph in the first place, was Yitzchak. Anyway, he pointed me in the direction. There's a story I heard from him that I turned into a song. Too fast. There we go. There once was a person who lived a good and pious life. But as the years went by, they were troubled by a question that burned its way deep into the fabric of their soul. So they sought out Reb Zalman Schacter-Shalomi as he walked along a path at Eilat Chaim Retreat Center, drinking a glass of wine, and they said, Reb Zalman, how can I act l'shem Hashemayim, for the sake of heaven? How do I set God before me always? Reb Zalman laughed, took a sip of his wine, and said, let me tell you a story. You see, there once was a person who lived a good and pious life, but as the years went by, they were troubled by a question that burned its way deep into the fabric of their soul. So they sought out Amachi Mira as she sat in her ashram drinking a cup of milk, and they said, Mother Mira, what does the great Mother Saraswata Ishvara want of me in this incarnation? Mother Mira took a sip of her milk, laughed, and said, I tell you. Let me tell you a story. You see, there once was a person who lived a good and pious life, but as the years went by, they were troubled by a question that burned its way deep into the fabric of their soul. So they sought out Edu Shimano Roshi as he sat on a hilltop outside his zendo drinking a glass of juice. And they said, Shimano Roshi, what does Dharmakaya require of me to attain my Buddha Dhatu? Shimano Roshi took a sip of his juice, smiled, and said, let me tell you a story. You see, there once was a person who lived a good and pious life, but as the years went by, they were troubled by a question that burned its way deep into the fabric of their soul. So they sought out Hazrat Pir Jalaladdin Ali as they sat in his study drinking a cup of tea. They said, Pir Jalaladdin, how can I best serve Allah, Rahman, Rahim, the compassionate, the merciful? Jalaladdin took a sip of his tea, laughed, and he said, well, let me tell you a story. You see, there once was a person who lived a good and pious life, but as the years went by, they were troubled by a question that burned its way deep into the fabric of their soul. You know where this is going, right? So they sought out Father Thomas Merton as he walked in a forest clearing high in the Cumberland Mountains with a bottle of beer, and they said, Father Thomas, how can I honor the Blessed Mother? How can I serve Christ in this world? Father Thomas took a sip of his beer, laughed, and said, well, let me tell you a story. You see, there once was a person who lived a good and pious life, but as the years went by, they were troubled by a question that burned its way deep into the fabric of their soul. So they sought out Brother Rufus Goodstrikers. He stood on a cliff overlooking a wide valley in southwest Arizona drinking a glass of water. They said, Brother Rufus, how do Din DNA want me to live my life? How do I serve the Husjan, the Earth Mother? Brother Rufus took a sip of his water and said, let me tell you a story. You see, there once was a person who lived a good and pious life, but as the years went by, they were troubled by a question that burned its way deep into the fabric of their soul. So they sought out Magid Yitzchak Buxbaum as he sat in his apartment in Brooklyn Heights drinking a cup of coffee. They said, Reb Yitzchak, how do I keep the flame of Torah alive within me? How do I honor and praise HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Yitzchak, master storyteller, took a sip of his coffee and he said, let me tell you a story so that you can tell others a story, so that they can tell still others a story. You see, the Torah is nothing but stories. And all the great books that have ever been written are really nothing but stories. We spend our lives looking for our own story, our true story, our one story, the story that burns its way deep into the fabric of our soul.
Let's take a moment to receive the truth of that offering. Thank you so much, Stephen. This is going to be an unusual transition. But you moshniks already know that I can do that sometimes. So many years ago, Renee and I arrived home late at night, and we turned the TV on, and for some reason we found ourselves in one of those stations that are high up, maybe 66 or 35 or whatever, not a regular station. And what came on? There was Ben Zion Schenker singing with a full orchestra behind him. We were soon to find out that this was a Chabad telethon, a fundraiser for Chabad, what I like to call Give Milut Chasadim. Some of you might get that little, you got it, Dad. You're going to have to tell your story following this because I'm not done. And so as I was trying to figure out how to weave all our tellers together, for some reason that came to me. The Torah of that night of raising money for Chabad. And so I just have to share with you a video of one such Chabad telethon. And you're soon going to see the musicians Harry Dean Stanton, Peter Himmelman, and you will soon recognize who this is.
Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to introduce a friend and a legend in our time, the one and only Bob Dylan.
Watch Dylan. It looks like he can't wait to get out of there fast enough. You notice he did not bring his guitar, or just his harmonica. Well, he's one of us. They all are. And we have a Pulitzer Prize winning poet in our midst. And we also have a wonderful storyteller from Texas. That's right. He is from Texas. Rabbi Dan Gordon. It's all yours, Dan. Thank you so much for being here this evening. Please welcome Reb Dan.
Shalom Aleichem, everybody. Steve, that was just fabulous. And I was all prepared to tell a very different story. And when you told the story of the stories of the stories of the stories, I don't know if I've ever told this one for the Zumagog, but this is the one that I have to tell. It's a story that begins with a classic tale that I've changed. I've modified it. And someone said, how could you change that story so much? And I said, I don't know how much I changed the story. I just know how much the story's changed me. But before I get into that, the fact that Shavuot and Mother's Day came so close together, I feel like I want to share with you a poem that was written in 1974 by a woman named Bailey Gordon for my bar mitzvah. And my mother Bailey is now in assisted living. She's about to turn 93. She and her husband, my father, have been married almost 70 years. And she doesn't know where she is. But when I recite something that she's written, and I pause, she fills in the blanks. It's called a parent's prayer. In your wisdom, God, you renew each day the miracle of creation. Yet we, your children, tend to accept the awesome rise of the warming sun without the courtesy of a silent thanks. So too it is when that first chaste cry of a new human soul pierces our time-misted dreams. We think that the clay is ours to mold, that we will bend its shape and define its form. The twig grows out from the branch in the direction of its own choice, and the child nods to the parent and chooses its own path. Perhaps that's why you've given us a time such as this, to pause, to reflect, to wonder about the precious uniqueness of every separate being. The twig grows out from the branch in the direction of its own choice. The child nods to the parent as they set on their own course. As mothers and as fathers, we acknowledge that too as a miracle and offer thanks, God, that your own parenthood of this humble race has shown how love may ease the path. This story is called The Next Last Story. There was a man who was looking for his purpose in life. And the Talmud says, when you look for your purpose, find yourself a teacher. And he found a teacher. He found the greatest teacher he could find. The teacher he found was the Baal Shem Tov, the master of the good name. And he went to the master and he said, can you tell me what my purpose is? And the master looked into his eyes and he said, you have a purpose in story. Well, can you teach me about story? And so the master, the Baal Shem Tov, took him on as a student, and he taught him about how to tell a story. He taught him how to make a booming voice to get everyone's attention. And he taught him how quietly people might listen a little bit closer. He taught him about gestures, how to make your body move in ways that people will really notice you. And he taught him about stillness, that could get noticed just as well. He taught about timing. When you speak quickly and you show your excitement, or when you slow things down and perhaps take a pause to give people time to think and to feel. And he taught him how to look into the eyes of the listeners and try to tell what story they need to hear. And then, after all that technique, the master said, now it's time for stories. And he told story after story after story, stories that made him laugh, stories that made him cry, stories that made him think and ponder and chuckle, and stories that confused him and made him question. And when he had told so many stories, the Baal Shem Tov said to his student, that's it. That's all I have. That was the last story. And now it is time for you, my friend, to take these stories and find the people who need to hear them. What do you mean? Said the storyteller. You mean I leave my home? I go venture out with no home base? And the Baal Shem Tov said, someday you will see what a blessing this is. And so the storyteller packed his things and he started traveling and he started looking for people to listen to his stories. And sometimes he hit the right chord and sometimes he didn't. And as he continued to tell and go from town to town, he felt he was getting a little bit better. He was trying to remember the lessons the Baal Shem Tov had taught him, but most of all, he was trying to look at the people and feel what they needed. As he continued, he felt he was getting better, and people started to applaud. Sometimes give him a gift, a meal, a night's lodging, a piece of clothing, and then people started giving him money. They paid him to tell stories. Oh, this is working out just great, thought the storyteller. I can make a living from this. And he would get more. The better he got, the more he reached the people, the more he got paid. And one day he proudly walked into an inn and he said, I am a storyteller. I have stories to tell. I have studied with a master, the great Baal Shem Tov himself. Who is ready to hear a story? And nobody was. Nobody. The innkeeper came up to him and said, every storyteller in the world has been to this inn. We've heard them all before. We're all storied out. So the storyteller shrugged his shoulders and prepared to go on his way. But then the innkeeper said, wait. Have you been to the top of the hill? For there lives a very rich nobleman who has said he will pay for any story that he's never heard before. Well, that's where I'm going. So he went to the top of the hill. He pounded on the door. A servant opened the door. The storyteller told him why he was there. He was led into this large ballroom where the nobleman sat on a throne and said, you're a storyteller? Go on. Tell. The storyteller looked into the eyes of the nobleman. What is the story that will move this man? I've got it. I've got the perfect story, he thought, and he told it with passion. He told it with energy. He told it better than it had ever been told before, and when he finished telling, the nobleman said, I've heard that one before. Tell another. He tried again. Once again, looking into his, this one's better. This one's better, I know it. And he tried once again, told it better than it's ever been told before. And when he finished, the nobleman said, I haven't heard that one before. Here's a coin. Tell another. And on it went. Story after story after story. And every time he finished a story, the nobleman said one of two things. I've heard that one before, tell another. Or, I haven't heard that one before, here's a coin, tell another. Tell another, tell another, tell another. And the storyteller was gaining quite a few coins. And he was getting rich. But he didn't feel very rich. Because he didn't get a smile, or a tear, or a chuckle. Just tell another, tell another, tell another. And finally, when he was completely drained, the storyteller said, that's it. That's all I have. That was the last story. And the nobleman said, well, you really have no more? Well, here, 5 more coins for your trouble. Now be gone. The storyteller left. Counted his coins. I've gotten quite rich this day, he said to himself, but I don't feel rich at all. What could I have done differently? How could I have moved that man? What other story could I have? He remembered one more story. He ran right past the servant into the ballroom. He said to the nobleman, there is one more story. I can't believe I forgot to tell it. It's the last story the Baal Shem Tov told me before he sent me on my way. Here it is. I've got it now. Here's the last story. And the nobleman said, well, go on, tell. He said, well, it's a real story. It's a story that happened to the Baal Shem Tov, and it's a story without an end. He told me that he was once approached by somebody who had been watching him for weeks. And it was a very rich businessman. And the businessman approached the Baal Shem Tov, and he said, I've been watching you. I've been watching your teaching, your storytelling, your music, your magic. And you know, it seems so different from my world. Because when I was a boy, I saw how the scholars and teachers lived so poorly. And I said, that will never work for me. And so I devoted my life to doing unto others before they did unto me. And it's worked quite well said the businessman. I've become quite rich, but I've never quite felt rich. And I see what a rich life you have by teaching. No matter what age the person is, you find the right story, the right lesson, the right song, the right nigun. I know, Master. It's time for me to change. Can you teach me how to change? And the Baal Shem Tov said, when the time is right, you'll be ready. And this didn't satisfy the businessman. He said, how will I know when the time is right? And the Baal Shem Tov said, when you hear your own story told to you, the time will be right. As the storyteller said these words, a tear fell down the cheek of the nobleman. He hugged the storyteller and said, the time is right. I'm ready. My friends, if there's any lesson that we have, that we got at Sinai, is tell your story. Find your story. Tell your story, because you never know when the story you need to tell is the one someone needs to hear.
Ain't that the truth? Thank you, Reb Dan.
Beautiful.
Welcome, everyone. Those of you who have joined us since we began. I see Cantor Cindy is with us, and Reb Margot, Miriam Margot. Welcome, Abby. A lot of Alefniks with us tonight, of which I'm very, very grateful that you have joined us here. And of course, all my regular beloved Moshniks with us this evening. I used to think that Torah was irrelevant, nothing to do with my life. That was long before I met Reb Zalman and these wonderful merry pranksters in the Jewish Renewal movement. The Lubavitcher Rebbe famously said that you have to live with the times. And what he was talking about is that you live with the Parsha Shavuot. You have to live with what the Torah is offering us and see yourself in there. Well, this Shabbat here in the Zumagog, we will be unpacking the book of Ruth with a play reading of the book. And I think the book of Ruth is one of those treasured texts in which presents us with great relevance. The book of Ruth begins this way, and then I'm going to go in a much different direction. Vayihi b'mei shvot hashoftim, vayihi ra'av ba'aretz. It was during the days that the judges judged that there was a great famine in the land. And remember, Naomi leaves where she lives, leaves the land where the famine is to make her way to Bethlehem. And so the rabbis in their commentary point out that perhaps it was that the judges were only willing to judge others and not judge themselves, not see themselves for who they were, that brought on the famine. And so we were studying this in Chavruta the other day. I've been part of the same Chavruta for it must be at least 25 years. And it took us down the rabbi hall to a parable that I have never heard before. Maybe some of you have, that I think is relevant to our time. This ancient parable was told by Yotam, the only surviving son of the judge Gideon, to warn the people of Shechem about their foolish choice to make his murderous brother Avimelech their king. And Yotam warns the people through a parable. It's known as Yotam's fable, also known as the parable of the trees. And it unfolds like this. He tells the story that the fruit trees went out to anoint a king over them. They first asked the olive tree to reign over them, and then the fig tree, and then the grapevine. All three of them refused, stating they're too busy producing valuable oil, sweet fruit, and wine to abandon their purpose just to lanua al ha'etzim, hold sway over the trees. They weren't interested in that kind of power, in any power at all, but to be themselves and do what they do best. And so, desperate for a ruler, the trees turned to the lowly thorn bush. Vayomeru kol ha'etzim al ha'atad, lech ata mlach aleinu, come, reign over us. The thorn bush thought about it for less than a split second and said, okay, I will do that. But in the next instant, he says that the other trees will have to give him complete trust, complete faith, no matter what he says or does, or else fire will come out and devour the majestic cedars of Lebanon. That is the parable of Yotam, the parable of the trees. And I hesitate to spell it out, but I think I need to. The fruit trees represent leaders who are content serving their communities. I think some of us are in this room right now. The thorn bush represents Avimelech, a reckless, dangerous ruler with nothing to offer, but demands absolute submission, or he will destroy those who cross him. And who says that Torah isn't relevant? Our next teller is a dear friend of mine and Renée's. Together we formed the Multi-Faith Storytelling Institute, and the rest is history. Because now Shulamit has been proclaimed a rock star at Moshe. We're in our 7th year online, and every Shabbos morning you offer a meditation, Shulamit. And so the first time that we all got together in person for our very first in-person retreat, people were so excited to meet you because all they saw was, just like now, you from your chest up. Right?
Yes.
And
exactly.
Every week you lead us into the depth of our souls with a meditation. And of course, always with good humor and always with a hallelujah. So please welcome our good friend, Shulanmit Fagan.
Hi, everybody. Hag Sameach. It's lovely to be here. Those are very hard acts to follow, but I'm going to give it a shot. This is a story about a different holiday, one that you may like. My grandparents came here from Latvia and Lithuania in the early 1900s. So did many, many other Jewish immigrants. So did many other immigrants that weren't Jewish, but it's the Jewish ones I would like to tell you about. When my ancestors were in Europe, living in the shtetls, they were very observant Jews. Actually, it was easy to be observant because it was Friday, it was time to get ready for Shabbos, everybody got ready for Shabbos. There was cooking and cleaning and everything that needed to be done, but everybody did it. Shabbos happened and you just needed to be ready. But when these fine people came to America, things were a little different. They had brilliant dreams. They might have even thought that the streets were paved in gold. They were looking for dreams of money and freedom. But of course, we know that the streets were not paved in gold. In fact, they weren't even paved in silver. There were 20 people for every available job. So when Moshe arrived in New York, he had a hard time finding employment. In Latvia, he was a tailor with a very fine reputation. He wanted to open his own tailor shop, but first he needed some money, and it seemed that all the jobs were taken. Finally, he got a job schlepping. He would take things from a warehouse to a boat or from a boat to a train. It was hard work, but it made some money, and it was enough to at least feed his hungry children and take care of the rent of a small third-story walk-up. He worked on Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday. His bones hurt. He was so tired. But again, at least he was making money. Maybe they even had enough for a little chicken on Shabbos. So Moshe was taken a little aback when on Friday the boss said to him, "All right, you can come again tomorrow." Tomorrow? Tomorrow's Shabbos. What are you talking about? I can't work on Shabbos. And the boss said, "Well, if you don't work on Shabbos, don't come back the next day either." Well, he just didn't know what to do, but he went home to Chaya and said, but I can't work on Shabbos. So the next week he went out looking again. And on Monday he didn't find anything. And on Tuesday he didn't find anything until very late in the afternoon. And then he worked and schlepped and worked and schlepped. And on Friday, guess what? The same thing happened again. And he said, "I can't work tomorrow. It's Shabbos." And the guy said, "If you don't come in tomorrow, don't bother coming back." Well, he was really, really upset. The next week he went out again and he didn't find anything until Wednesday. But when he did find something, at least it was at a sewing machine. He got a job making overcoats. It was the same thing every day. It wasn't creative. It wasn't like he did before, but at least he knew how to sew, and he made a little bit more money than he had made before. And this time on Shabbos, on Friday, the next day was Shabbos, the boss said, "You have to come to work tomorrow, or don't bother coming back." And Moshe thought, well, I guess I better come to work tomorrow. And so he did. He gave in. It's like I said before, there were hungry mouths to feed and jobs were hard to come by, and no one was finding the gold that they thought the streets had been paved in. The work was hard, the hours were long, and Moshe found that he needed to compromise even more. His boss started talking about his hair. "What are those long curly things on the side of your face, and why do you need those? And by the way, your hair is just too long. Why don't you get a little modern? After all, this is America." Well, eventually he gave in. A little more oi and a little more oi after that, and then it was easier to just conform. The beard and the payas were gone, his observance of Shabbos had already gone, and since he worked such long hours, there was little time for his sons, let alone his wife. Eventually, even though he was working so hard, they had another son. With him at work, his wife really tried hard to keep the boys in line, but it didn't work so well. Shimon and Herschel both had bar mitzvah, but after that, the old traditions didn't seem very important to them. New York offered so many distractions for young men, and Chaya just wasn't able to insist that they continue to daven. Without Moshe at home, Shabbos just wasn't the same, and soon the older boys were hardly around even then. Judah, the youngest son, was the exception. He was only 9, but he was deeply spiritual, and Judaism was very, very important to him. He couldn't wait through the morning secular classes to get to the afternoon studies of Torah and Talmud. He loved to daven and dreamt of studying even more. One day, about a week before Hanukkah, Judah was searching through his father's closet, trying to see if there was something in there to surprise him in a few days. Well, he didn't find any gifts for him, but he did find a small box, which he opened up, and inside of it there was a piece of paper that was a little crumpled, and he used his little hands to smooth it out, and he looked carefully, and he saw a man and a woman that were holding hands. He thought, well, it looks like my parents, but I've never seen my dad and mom hold hands. I wonder when this is from. And then he kept looking in the box and he found a blue velvet bag that was tied very tightly. And he opened this and he turned it over, and out came little boxes with long leather straps on them. Well, Judah knew what they were. He had seen some men in his shul during the week wearing them wrapped around their arms, but he'd never seen his dad wear one, and he wondered what that was about. He took those 2 items and he took them into his bedroom and he put them under his pillow. And that night before he went to sleep, he looked under the pillow to make sure they were still there. And of course they were. He was very excited. He carefully wound those straps back up and he put the picture in there. And the next day, he wondered about what was in that bag, in that picture that was holding memories for people. And it was almost Hanukkah. He went to his mom, and his mom promised that his father would be home to light the first candle and that his brothers would be there too. Well, now he was really excited. So he took that picture and he made a little frame out of popsicle sticks. And he put the picture in the frame and he wrapped it up in some colorful newspaper he found. And then he took the bag with the tefillin and he wrapped that up in a different kind of paper. And he was so excited. He kept running to his mother and saying, "Are you sure they're coming? Will they all be here?" Well, sure enough, they were. Shimon and Herschel were there to light the candle. Oy, he was driving her crazy. Chaya was busy herself. I mean, she had 3 jobs at least. She cleaned houses halfway across New York, and then sometimes a friend would let her clean an office just a few doors away. But she worked so hard, and she missed her Moshe, and lately she missed her boys as well. Well, Thursday finally arrived. Judah had polished the large silver candle that they brought from home, and he put in very carefully the first candle and the shamus, and the boys actually got home early, and they were all waiting, and finally they heard Moshe's footsteps coming up the stairs. He walked in, he was dejected and tired and sad, but when Judah's hands went around his waist from behind and hugged him, he woke up. And the family lit the candle together, and the old familiar songs just rolled off their tongues. Before his mother could gather the few presents they had for the boys, Judah ran to his room and emerged with his 2 carefully wrapped packages. "What's this?" his mother said. Open it, he pleaded. And she did. She looked at this picture and the tears rolled down her face. She saw herself in her wedding dress, holding the hand of her beloved Moshe. "Open yours, Papa, open up yours." When the old velvet bag was revealed, his father's eyes filled with tears as well. "Tell me about them, Papa. Tell me about when you wore them. Tell me about what it was like to be born in Latvia. Tell me what you dreamt about when you were young." That Hanukkah night went on and on. Judah and his brothers heard stories they had never heard before, stories of life and love, of shtetls and shuls, of good times and not such good times. And when the night was over, all of them knew that dreams had survived, that some of them might still come true, and that their life in America would never be quite the same again.
Thank you, my holy friend.
Thank you for listening.
I'm not sure if you were the only one, Reb Dan, among the tellers who asked what the theme was, but I know you did ask me. And when you asked, I think I immediately responded with that the theme is every story is a sacred story. This is what makes our Zumagog, Minyan Oneg Shabbat, what it is, because we all have an opportunity every Shabbat morning to tell our stories. Every one of us in small intimate groups in safety and confidence. And so, for those of you who've never joined us before for one of our gatherings, especially on Shabbat morning, guess what? You're now on our mailing list. And if you don't happen to have somewhere else to go on a Shabbat morning at 10 a.m. Eastern Time, yes, some people actually join us from California and from the Vatican, but not the Pope. I want to invite you now to join us, if you're so inclined, because we've co-created something very, very special. I was reading an article today that Reb Zalman of blessed memory wrote many, many, many years ago. Rabbi J. Michelson shared it on his blog about Reb Zalman's love of technology. And I happen to think that Reb Zalman is quelling and from our use of technology here in the Zumagog and how we use it to create a sacred environment and a safe one and a joyous one and a contemplative one. Our next and last teller, I met Renée at a Cage conference in 1991. I was performing with 3 different musical groups: Cantor Michael Stein, Robin Helsner, and Rabbi David Schneier. I'd never been to Cage before. And Robin said to me, with your luck, you'll meet somebody. And so it was there, during the Russian coup, after a major hurricane, that Renée stepped out into the light across a crowded quad at Hofstra University. We made eye contact, and she continued to walk in a different direction. But I caught up to her. What was she doing? She was telling stories, of course. And we've been together ever since. So please welcome the woman downstairs from me, Renée Brachfeld.
There we go. I want to be able to see all of you and not just myself. Here we go. Now you've got me totally distracted, Mark. Around the year 1600, there lived in Krakow a very important rabbi named Rabbi Yom Tov Lipman Heller, who was widely known for his writings about the Mishnah. Now, there lived at the same time in Krakow, there lived a very rich Jew who was known as the greatest miser in all the world. This miser, he had no family. His name was Yossele. But back then in Krakow, the Jews, the Jewish community, it was made up mostly of people who were poor and downtrodden and depressed. There was only this one Jew who had a lot of money, Yossele the miser. All the rabbis went to knock on his door to try and get him to part with a few of his coins, but no matter how much they asked or begged or even threatened, the answer was always no. But a miser is a kind of an outcast. Yossele wasn't really able to take part in the community once people discovered that that's what he was. The children would follow him down the street, pointing and taunting. Yossele is a miser. Sometimes those children, they even threw rocks at him. At shul, nobody would look at him. They wouldn't say good Shabbos. In fact, in order to try and induce him to give charity to the people, they withheld giving Yoseleh any honors, hoping that he would relent and give something. But Yoseleh, he was not going to give anything at all. One day, the Chevra Kadisha, the burial society, heard that Yoseleh, he was very sick. It looked like he was going to die. So they went to talk to him. They said, Yoseleh, you're going to want to be buried. You should, what are you going to do with all that money you have? You have no family. So why don't you give us like 1,000 rubles? And then we could bury you. And after you're gone, we could give all that money to the poor. I don't have money to give you, said Yoseleh. Go away. If we go away, there's not going to be anyone to bury you, said the members of the burial society. It's all right, said Yoseleh. I'll bury myself. In disgust, the members of the Chevra Kadisha, they left him there alone and sick. And just after they left, you know what happened. Yoseleh, it was his time. He said the Shema and departed. Now, usually it was their job. They would show up then, the Chevra Kadisha, after somebody left. But they said, he didn't give us anything. He said he buried himself. We're just going to leave him. And they didn't go back. And they just left him there. That was on a Sunday. And then it was Monday and Tuesday, and Yoseleh was just there, unburied. One of his neighbors, he began to be afraid. Surely the ghost of Yoseleh was going to come haunt them all if he just stayed there unburied. It wasn't right, thought the neighbor. And so that night, after dark, this one neighbor took pity on him. And after dark, after everyone was asleep, because in fact, the man was more afraid of his neighbors than he was of Yoseleh's ghost. But after dark and everyone was asleep, he went over and he got the body of Yoseleh and he put it in a wagon and he took it down to the cemetery. And there, in the back of the cemetery of Krakow, under a tree, in the area where the paupers were buried, he dug a hole and he himself put Yoseleh into that hole and covered him up, all alone in the paupers' cemetery. And then another day passed. And then it was Thursday. And that night, a poor man came to Rabbi Yom Tov Lipman Heller, this important rabbi. He knocked on the door. He was a poor man. And he said, Rabbi, I can't buy anything for my family for Shabbos. We're not going to have any dinner. Could you give me some money, please? Well, of course I'll give you something, said the rabbi. But tell me, did you just suddenly become poor? No, said the man. I've barely earned a living for 20 years now. So why have I never seen you here before? What have you been doing for your Shabbos dinner till now? Well, Rabbi, to tell you the truth, for these 20 years when I have a job, but it doesn't quite feed my family, every Thursday morning when I wake up, there's an envelope under my door with 5 rubles in it, enough to feed us Shabbos dinner and keep us going the rest of the week. Just not 5 minutes later, another person came and knocked on Rabbi Heller's door. And this time it was the school teacher. And he had almost the same story. He knocked on the door and said, Rabbi, please, I need a few rubles. Could you spare some? We have nothing with which to buy Shabbat dinner this week. Well, certainly I can do that, but what's happened that you need this money? Oh, I've needed it for years. For 10 years I've been the school teacher, and it's my job, but it doesn't really make me a living. So what have you been doing all this time? Asked the rabbi. Well, every Thursday morning when I wake up, there's an envelope under the door, 2 rubles. It's enough for it's just me and my wife. So that's enough. We can buy food for our Shabbos dinner and keep us going the rest of the week. And that happened over and over and over again. In fact, the rabbis of Krakow got together and discussed it. It was happening to all of them. Poor people were coming as if out of the woodwork, people who had never before approached them to ask for anything. And they all had this story about having an envelope slipped under their door. And the rabbis started to think about it. And then gradually they came to realize what had been going on. That the envelopes slipped under the door, it must have been Yosela the miser. He must have been going around, thought Rabbi Heller. He must have been going around and putting the envelopes, but there was something that Rabbi Heller didn't understand. And he asked those poor people, he said, wait, if I understand you right, you got 5 rubles and you got 10 rubles and you got 2 rubles. How did he know how much you needed? And how did he know where you lived? And each of those people, they told him the same story. It turns out that there in Krakow, everybody knew who the only rich Jew was. And so at one point in every poor person's life, it appeared they would summon up all their nerve and they would go and talk to Yosela the miser. They would go and knock on his door, and Yosela would open the door and approach them with love, and he would invite them in, and he would ask them what it was they wanted, and they would talk to him about how poor they were and how they couldn't really feed their families and how they had nothing left to buy a meal for the Sabbath. And he would ask them lots of questions. He'd really interview them. He'd want to know how many children did they have and how were they getting by and what. And then he would ask, what is it that you need? How much do you really need to survive? And this one would say, well, just a couple of rubles. It's just me and my wife. And this one would say, well, I have 12 children. We really need. And each one told him what they needed, and he'd write it down on a piece of paper, and then he'd ask them their address and find out where they lived, and then he'd sit them in a chair and give them something to eat, and they'd have a lovely conversation. They'd talk about all kinds of things. And then at some point, each of them told the same story. At some point, Yosela would stop being warm and caring and loving, and he'd jump up and start shouting at them and say, what do you think I am? Crazy? Why have you come to bother me? Get out of my house. And he'd chase them out. And the poor person would go home and say to their partner and their children, he's a crazy person. He just yelled at me. That's not going to be the solution to our problems. But the following Thursday, when they woke up in the morning, there was the envelope under their door. That Thursday, and every Thursday after that, for weeks and months and years, the money was a constant. They didn't have to worry anymore. Rabbi Heller, he was beside himself listening to the story. He must have gone there late at night all alone. Yossele the miser distributing these envelopes to every poor person in town, keeping them going. Rabbi Yom Tov Heller, he was heartbroken. We didn't even bury him. The Holy of Holies, not only what did he give, he gave like God gives, unannounced and unacknowledged. Rabbi Heller, he announced a fast day for the whole city. Everybody came. The poor people who'd lived from Yossele all those years, all the same people whose children had taunted the miser, who'd thrown stones at Yossele and mocked him. And they were all gathered and crying in the synagogue. And then just at the end of the day, when the fast was over, Rabbi Heller felt they hadn't gotten Yossele's forgiveness yet, but the day was over. So he went home and he slept. And that night, Yossele came to him in a dream. And he said, Rav Yom Tov Heller, please tell all my brothers and sisters not to worry. There's no reason to fast. This is the way I wanted it. I wanted to have the privilege of giving like God gives without anybody knowing. Please tell all my friends, tell the poor people, I'm here in heaven. And there's really only one thing that I miss here. I'd give anything for another Thursday morning at 2 a.m., for another door, for another envelope with rubles to give away in honor of the Holy Shabbos. Rabbi Yom Tov Lippman Heller, he woke up and he realized what he had to do. Yossele had just been put into a grave in the paupers area, so he had a headstone made for him. He had a headstone carved that said, Yossele, holy miser. And Rabbi Heller requested that when he died, he wanted to be buried in a place of honor right next to Yossele, the holy miser. And you can travel to Krakow even today and see them both at rest there together in that cemetery.
Thank you, Renee. There are many versions of the story. It makes me recall that oftentimes in concert, Renee and I would tell a story and a child would come up to us afterwards and say, was that a true story? And our response would always be, well, it may not have happened exactly that way, but it is a true story. So we're coming in for a landing here, my friends. And I want to tell you a true story. But it's not my story. It's a story that is told by this man, David Weisberg, the executive director of the World Jewish Relief. If you're interested in the entire article, of which I'm going to read a little bit from, it was in the Times of Israel blog section. What is the article? The article is when Reb Zalman met Pete Seeger. In almost his first words of greeting, Pete asked Zalman, so what did the Jews think of my taking the words of Ecclesiastes and putting them to music? He was referring, of course, to turn, turn, turn. He added, I changed some of the words. Zalman's eyes lit up. Oh, really? What did you change? And then Pete and Reb Zalman sat together in Pete's living room reviewing the lyrics of Turn, Turn, Turn against the original text of Ecclesiastes, Kohelet. What I remember most vividly, though, was not the text study itself. It was the joy, the delight both of these world changers took in the conversation. The sense that ancient wisdom was not something fragile to be preserved behind glass, but something alive enough to keep entering into dialogue with the modern world. Pete Seeger understood something profound about Ecclesiastes. The enduring power of those verses lies partly in their insistence that human life unfolds in seasons. Which reminds me of Reb Zalman's book, The December Project, in which he goes into the seasons of our lives. Continuing the article, a time to break down, a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time of war and a time of peace, a time to gain, a time to lose. Pete believed music could help people recognize one another's humanity more fully. Zalman believed spirituality should expand the boundaries of the heart rather than narrow them, and Judaism at its best insists that revelation is not merely something that happened once atop a mountain thousands of years ago. Revelation continues whenever we allow ourselves to truly encounter others. Just as Pete and Zalman did 14 years ago. Whenever we refuse indifference, whenever we choose compassion over cynicism, whenever we understand that another person's suffering is not disconnected from our own humanity, whenever we realize that we are not helpless, that if each of us carries a basket, we can move nations. That afternoon in Pete's living room was filled with laughter, music, curiosity, and conversation. But looking back, I think what moved me most was witnessing two wise elders still so open to wonder. To everything turn, turn, turn. There is a season, turn, turn, turn. Still listening, still learning from one another, still searching for wisdom inside ancient words. Perhaps that is the enduring challenge of Shavuot. Not whether revelation once happened, but whether we are still capable of hearing it now. Knowing that when each of us commits to making impact, we can change the world together. And being empowered by the words that Pete added to those of Ecclesiastes. I swear it's not too late. Please join me. To everything turn, turn, turn. There is a season, turn, turn, turn. And a time to every purpose under heaven. A time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, a time to reap, a time to kill, a time to heal, a time to laugh, a time to weep. To everything a turn, turn, turn. There is a season, turn, turn, turn. And a time to every purpose under heaven. A time to gain, a time to lose, a time to rend, a time to sow, time to love, a time to hate, a time for peace. I swear it's not too late. To everything turn, turn, turn. There is a season, turn, turn, turn. And a time for every purpose under heaven. Reb Zalman was good friends with Gene Houston, who died a few days ago. I mentioned before that there was a Shabbaton in Ashland, Oregon some years ago that Reb Zalman and Jean Houston attended with a number of other interfaith leaders. And at the very end, Jean Houston offered the metta, loving kindness meditation. So to close out tonight's beautiful gathering, and I want to thank Linda Hirschhorn and Steve Klaper and Shulanmit Fagan and Renée Brachfeld. And thank you all for being with us and creating this holy space together of tellers and listeners. Let us use this meditation, the metta meditation. First, we're going to say it for ourselves, and then we're going to bring to mind someone that we care about, and I'll offer what direction we'll be offering the prayer in after each verse. Please join me. This is for each of us. This is for you. May I be happy. May I be safe. May I be healthy and strong. May I be free from suffering. And now bringing to mind someone that you care about. May you be happy. May you be safe. May you be healthy and strong. May you be free from suffering. And now bringing to mind someone that you do not know well. Perhaps it's even someone here in this room. May you be happy. May you be safe. May you be healthy and strong. May you be free from suffering. And now, perhaps a difficult one, bringing to mind someone that you find difficult. And I'm going to give you a moment to bring that person to mind. And you know what? It might even be someone who has passed from this world. Someone who you never made tikkun, made a rectification, a repair with, but who can still hear you across the divide. May you be happy. May you be safe. May you be healthy and strong. May you be free from suffering. And now, extending loving kindness to all beings everywhere, Kol Yoshvei Tevel, all who dwell on the earth. And I want to invite us, as Devorah is doing, to take on the asana, the pose of the Kohanim, so that we allow the shafa, the flow of blessings, to flow through us to another in this Zumagog, and then beyond, so that it fills this world like a kos ravaya, a cup of love and kindness. May all beings be happy. May all beings be safe. May all beings be healthy and strong. And may all beings live for ease and peace. And together, let us say, Amen. You know, my friends, it is an injunction on us to be joyous in our festivals. V'samachta v'chagecha. To rejoice in your festivals, and that there should be only, sameach, only joy. Something came to mind to me that maybe the reason for that, for the 3 pilgrimage festivals, that we were given the instruction to go to the Holy Temple and bring something of ourselves as an offering. Just maybe it's because when we give of ourselves, we do it with an open heart and an open hand, in great, great simcha, in joy. Chag Sameach, everyone. V'samachta v'chagecha והיית אך שמח ושמחת וחגך והיית אך שמח ושמחת וחגך והיית אך שמח ושמחת וחגך והיית אך שמח. איי 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 חג שמח סינדי איי 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 לה 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 היי איי 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 דידי איי 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 דידי איי איי לה 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 איי 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 ay 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 if the wet Hashem besimcha, 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 oh the fun of Bir Nana, the fun of Bir Nana, if the wet Hashem besimcha, if the wet Hashem besimcha, oh the fun of Bir Nana, the fun of Bir Nana, ay 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 did it ay 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 did it ay did it ay ay la la did it ay did it ay did it ay did it ay 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 did it ay did it ay did it ay 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 ay. How about spotlighting all of our tellers? La 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 did it ay la 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 ya la 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 the Rabbi Dan Gordon la 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 Cantor Linda Hirschhorn I did it I Rabbinic Pastor Shulanmit Fagan and her dancing flamingo did it I and Renée Brachfeld did it I 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 Chag Sameach, everyone.